Afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to start with a question, actually, and I wanted to start by saying, can you remember what you were up to back in 1999? For some of you, it may have been putting up the London Eye. For me, it wasn't, but I can remember one day really, really vividly. And it was because there had been a major security breach at the company I was working at. You've probably heard of it before. Somebody had clicked on a suspicious link in an email. And of course, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, that had run rife around the estate. That's not the reason that I remember this day so well. It's actually because it's the first day that I'd met my security director. He had kind of stomped into my office and demanded, can we blame this person for clicking on the link? Did he know? So my job as the junior security awareness administrator was to log into our e-learning system and find out whether he had completed his training. Well, you perhaps won't be surprised to know, but yes, he had completed his training. Not only had he completed his training, I think he'd completed it about 24 hours before he clicked on this link. Um, so it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because we are still dealing with these phishing emails. And in fact, 2020, since coronavirus, we've seen over a 600% increase in phishing activity, with cyber criminals playing on the coronavirus and people's fears and anxieties around it. So yes, as Phil said, my name's Sarah and I run a business called Layer8 that I set up with some colleagues about 5 years ago now, really because I'm interested in this point. Can we change people's behaviour when it comes to security awareness? Can we create secure and resilient businesses? So today I want to share with you some of the methods that we use with organisations like Zurich, Tesco's, National Grid, the Health Foundation, Olympia London. I'm going to share with you some of the techniques that we use to create secure behaviours and create resilient businesses. So I'm going to start off by trying to, in a very short space of time, get into why people make mistakes. And to understand that, we first of all need to get into our minds. And I always say, don't we all wish that we had a mind that looked as glittery and as shiny as this young lady's mind does here? But we need to break it down. And we first of all need to understand why people do the things that they do. Now, in security, we are quite often making two very simple mistakes. And that is that we think, well, if people didn't behave and do something, they obviously don't know, so they need more training. Or we think if they knew but chose not to do it, that means that they just don't care. But often there's some other reason. And if we don't know why, then we don't know what we need to do. Now, in the change theories that we look at, it's quite commonly understood that people will need one of these 7 stimuli on a regular, repeated basis to make change happen. They may need the knowledge, and if we relate this to perhaps password security, now people may know that they need a long and complex password for each of their accounts. Um, but do they have the desire and optimism to spend that 3 hours of their day to make those changes, to create all those secure passwords? Is the benefit apparent enough to them to do that? And that's often quite difficult when we're talking about cybersecurity. If we're talking about health, for example, we know that the benefits of jogging every day, eating good, nutritious food is going to have on our bodies. But can we say the same about spending 3 hours changing our passwords? The other thing that's quite interesting here is around skill set. So we often think if we tell somebody to do something, they're going to change behaviour. But the number of organisations that we've gone into, who employees have said to us, I've got too many passwords to remember. And we talk to them about password managers, and people don't know or aren't sure about how to select or choose password managers. So we need to understand that sometimes people make mistakes because we're not providing enough content and information for them. We also need to understand how the organisation's existing culture impacts on people's ability to behave securely. So if we go back to that story I shared right at the start about my security director coming in demanding to know whether this person could be blamed, that doesn't create a culture where employees feel that they can speak up, where they can seek advice, where they can put their hands up and ask questions. So are we creating a fear to speak up culture? Now, I've seen this really keenly there was a financial institution I worked alongside a number of years ago, who their fear culture was so bad, they had on average a 2-week delay between somebody losing or having their laptop stolen and it actually being reported, because people were so scared of the consequences. So we need to understand how our existing culture impacts. And finally, we need to think about people's inbuilt biases, of which we have just not got enough time to get into today, because we have thousands of flaws or inbuilt emotional and cognitive biases as humans. But one that does affect us quite a lot in security and cyber is overconfidence. And we see this a lot if we work with organisations who perhaps have got a very high governance structure or a very strong IT setup, that employees tend to think, do you know what? The business is going to sort this for me, and I don't really need to take any responsibility. So how does this relate to our world and projects, etc.? Now, I'm sure you've all heard of secure by design process, and that projects get assessed to see what data are they going to hold, and secure technology gets built into the project as it goes along. But what I'm talking about here is something slightly different. I'm talking about a secure by design mindset and thinking about security in everything that we do. So Stuart, I'm going to ask you if you could launch the poll question, please now. So at Glimpse last month, somebody asked a poll question about have you had a security breach or near miss in the last 12 months? And the results came back that over a third of people on the call had had a breach or a near miss in the last 12 months. So as a follow on to that, I want to ask, was that breach or near miss, was it just IT, or was a person or people involved with that breach or near miss? And of course, if you weren't on that call, then please just answer from your own perspective. Now, whilst people are popping in the answers, I'm going at 100 miles an hour here because I'm conscious of time. The statistics show that anywhere between sort of 80 and upwards of 90% of breaches or security incidents have human involvement. That's what general statistics states. I would probably argue, and there are a few people that argue, actually you could say it's 100%. Because to my knowledge, there's no IT systems or processes yet that have been solely created by systems, and there's no human intervention. So I guess as that result comes up, we can have a look at it. But for in interest of time, I'm going to, oh, it's come up just as I was saying. Okay. So we got 70% here that are saying it was IT, people who were involved, 30% IT issues. So slightly different to what I was saying, but obviously the people on the high side, as I expected. Let's have a look at how this works then. So quite often when we look at a security breach, particularly something where somebody has been socially engineered, we can be forgiven for thinking, no way would I fall for that. For example, this quite obvious Costa Coffee voucher scam here. But what the cyber criminals are doing is they are not dealing with us in our rational headspace, because they are absolute masters at messing with our emotions. They'll play on things like fear, urgency, opportunity, And what's going on in our brains at this point in time is we have this little almond piece. You may have heard of it. It's called the amygdala. The amygdala is a bit of our brain that's left over from when we were hunter-gatherers. And it is responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze responses. And when one of those emotions is triggered, perhaps it's the urgency to buy a domain name because our Layer8 domain name is going to go by the end of the day. Perhaps it's the fear because the boss has told us that we need to pay for an invoice and he or she is off on a flight. It has to be done now. The opportunity, whilst it's doesn't feel perhaps quite the same as being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or spearing our dinner if we haven't eaten for 3 days. Actually, those same chemicals are still being released at that moment. And what it does is it reduces our decision-making capacity to that of a 7-year-old child. A 7-year-old child. No wonder we have a problem. I always joke that I have a 7-year-old child and she regularly has a freeze response to choosing what pair of socks to wear in the morning. So herein lies our problem. How can we start to change behaviours? And I'm really just getting at the tip of the iceberg here. The problem is when we communicate about cybersecurity normally, we think this is what we need to tell people, and that should equal a change in behaviour. But if we think about how we change behaviour as human beings, change is complex. Change comes about because of the different interactions we have every day. It comes about through the conversations that we have, things that we read on the news, putting things into context. People perhaps disagreeing and having a debate with us. They are the types of things that create change and make it stick. So change is socially constructed by our interactions through asking really good questions that give us context and meaning that are relevant for us, our family situation, our business situation. And crucially as well, change is much better and more longer lasting if we're able to collaborate on change. And what do we do for all of that? We talk, don't we? We use conversation. Conversation really is our catalyst for change. And I want to leave you with one thing that you can do when you go back to your businesses or projects right now that will help increase the cybersecurity culture. And that is to start having conversations with your team or your project or your business about security. And they can start as simply, and this is a question that we use a lot. Tell me about a time you worked on a project and felt proud you'd been part of making it secure. The reason that we start with questions like that is because they really get to people's core values about why they do something above and beyond just finishing a project, just turning up to receive a paycheck. And when we find those things out, we can use them to collaborate and create change and integrate with the experts to actually design security into not just our project controls, but into all of the conversations and the way that we think about security as a group of people. So what are we doing at Layer8 on a day-to-day basis? Well, we are enabling organisations to have good, meaningful conversations about security that are creating change. So that sounds quite nebulous when I say it. So we pull that together into strategic plans for organisations that have got very clear deliverables, very clear outcomes. We're putting frameworks together for organisations to set them up with groups of security champions that can make change happen, that can facilitate change right at the grassroots of the business where it really matters. And we're also engaging people in what we call our Layer8 Toolkit, which is an app full of advice and guidance and small, short presentations to help engage the workforce on cybersecurity. So I am pretty much done. Just left to say, let's chat, because of course I love to chat, conversations and all that. Please, can I encourage you, I've really just tipped the iceberg. If you do connect with us on our social channels or on our website, you'll see us constantly posting free information about how you can engage your business in a conversation about security. So thank you very much.